First of all, I want to say that Orinoco Tribune has become, partly because of us in the UK, a very important point of reference regarding what goes on in Venezuela and elsewhere. The quality of the information, the quality of the articles, the quality of the coverage that Orinoco Tribune does every single time is really, really good. So congratulations to everyone. We used to use different sources. Now we concentrate, preferably on Orinoco Tribune than everybody else. So thank you for that. Now, what I want to do is I want to answer the question what the stakes are for this coming election. I'm going to cover some of the ground that's been covered already regarding the sanctions and the consequences of these. And I want to discuss the question of what the stakes are, what is involved at the end, if I may. Number one, apart from the 930 unilateral coercive measures, which are known as sanctions, for the period 2016 to the period of from 2016 to 2023, are breakdown as follows. The United States imposed 441, Canada 108, Panama 70, Switzerland 56, the European Union only 55, and the United Kingdom 36. Now, the important thing about these sanctions is what exactly is being targeted. The sanctions blockaded food, medicine, vaccine, fuel, diluents, finances, and just about everything else. The blockade on Venezuela, because it is a blockade, is a very comprehensive blockade. It blockades foreign trade, the oil industry, the gold trade, and it goes further. 40 Conviasa planes are banned from traveling to several destinations, and 17 more Venezuelan aircraft are also banned. There are 60 ships in the boats. My pronunciations at times betrays me there. In the list of entities being sanctioned. There have been, on top of that, the illegal confiscation or freezing of Venezuelan assets in the United States, current accounts. Monomeros, a company that belonged to Venezuela in Colombia, was also taken over. Citgo has been taken over. Monetary resources deposited in European financial institutions, 31 tons of gold in the Bank of England, all together amount to something like, so far, the information is not precise, but it's quite huge. It is between 40 to $60 billion, which is a huge amount. And you can imagine all of this actually has affected Venezuela terribly in many ways. I want to just highlight a few. Citgo was paying for high-cost surgical operations, marrow bone transplant, particularly abroad in Italy and other places. When Citgo was taken over by the United States with the collusion of white-owned company, these operations were suspended. And many of these, some of them young kids, actually died as a consequence of waiting to be operated. They couldn't. One of the consequences of financial blockade against Venezuela is the following. Venezuela pays money for services or goods it wants to obtain in the world market. Not only the bank or financial institution doesn't process the payment, but it retains the money, which is really bad. Not only it doesn't process and should retain the money, it retains it. So the result is, all state bodies in Venezuela have been targeted. It's very difficult for them, and no economy can survive without being able to actually operate, being inserted in the world economy. State bodies of every kind, the oil industry, transport, public finances, health, food, any other section, any other state that have been targeted, taken all together, all the state publicists receive 80% of the sanctions. That is to say, it's been a very determined, targeted, deliberate intention on the part of the United States, those who organize this, to really hit the state as hard as they can. Just to give an example, in December 2017, 11 bonds of Venezuela and PDVSA debt for $1.2 billion couldn't be paid because they were obstructed by sanctions. In November 2017, 23 Venezuelan financial operations aimed at purchasing food, basic inputs, and medicines were not processed by international banks because they were blocked due to the sanctions. Many of the banks are terrified of challenging the United States blockade against, a third country. And this is very, very significant part of the problem. So very quickly on the consequences. From 56 billion that Venezuela was receiving in revenues from its export activity, this declined to 743 million in 2020. That is to say, and this is repeated by leaders of the Bolivarian Revolution, Venezuela lost 99 out of every $100 that came in before 2013. From 2015 to 2022, as a result of these sanctions, Venezuela lost 44 billion on average every year. That makes out a grand total of $308 billion, which is the equivalent of almost 20 Nicaraguan economies. That gives you an idea of the size of it. Between 2015 and 2020, because of the sanctions, oil output from the oil industry in Venezuela fell by 87 to 90%. That is to say, Venezuela, from an average of 2.4 million barrels a day, began to produce less than 300,000. That meant that Venezuela lost $232 billion. So if you put this together, the consequences, the economic cost has been monumental. Inflation inevitably became hyperinflation given the consequences of all these sanctions. And I remember vividly when Mrs. Lagarde predicted as an official statement of the IMF that the inflation in Venezuela is going to reach 1.5 million%, which is something I just couldn't fathom in my head at the time, I remember. All of this was on top of black market, hoarding, the scarcity of food, and just about every other input. Some of the consequences have been, and there's been information on the part of the Venezuelan government, an increasing incidence of yellow fever, polio, influenza, diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, hepatitis B, and Haemophilus influenza type B. That is to say, the whole consequence of population, particularly the most vulnerable, has been horrible. The CEPR produced a report in 2018 regarding the consequences of the sanctions, and they reckon there that the number of people that died as a consequence of the sanctions only between the year 2017 and 2018 was 40,000. Now, let's just stop there. I think the number of people who have died as a consequence of the sanctions is much more than 100,000. In Chile, the Pinochet dictatorship in 17 years assassinated 5,000 people. That gives you an idea. This was equivalent of throwing bombs against the most vulnerable women, children, the chronically ill, and so on, because they were the ones, the victims of this horrible, nasty aggression from the United States and its accomplices against Venezuela. So, what is incredible, and I want to start to wrap up with this, what is incredible is the recovery. How can you, having been subjected to this extraordinary, monumental asphyxiation of your economy, where literally you were hanging on from the fields of your fingernails, literally, losing 99% of your revenues that were coming into the state before, only by having a government, only by having a state, only by having the institutions, only by having the organizations, the grassroots, the communal councils, the women, the trade unions, and so on, which exist in large quantities in Venezuela. Only that kind of government, that kind of state can actually protect the people of Venezuela from this aggression. And they were able to do that. Now Venezuela has recovered incredibly. The expected rate of growth for the year 2024, it is expected to be between 5 to 8%, which is will be one of the biggest in Latin America. Exports have increased massively. non-traditional export, I'm referring to, chocolate, rum, which we consume in London, and so many other wonderful things. The amount of self-sufficiency on food that Venezuela has been able to achieve is extraordinary. And the fostering the promotion of the small businesses is very interesting. There are private, communally owned, all sorts of arrangements. But there are thousands, I think it's about 30,000 new small entrepreneurs who actually are covering, supplying the population with what they need literally every single day. So smaller scale industrial good production has increased substantially. And so more important than that, despite all of these problems, which are gigantic, 5 million homes for the poor have been built. And Maduro committed government to build 6 more million in the next, 6 million more in the next few years. So the problem of housing is basically being resolved with very convenient conditions for the working class. So to finalize my point, were this government to disappear, were this government to be defeated, I think the analogy with Nicaragua is sort of short of the possibilities in consequential terms. The level of hatred that exists in the ruling class, in the oligarchy in Venezuela is extraordinarily intense. The Venezuelan opposition, the extreme right wing, Maria Corina Machado, Leopoldo Lopez, Julio Borges, and all these people who actually have fostered campaign to damage the countries as much as possible, including fomenting the possibility of an international military invasion and destruction of the country. If you read the details of the contract between Juan Guaido and the mercenary Guaidó, in 2020 in May, the contract allowed these mercenaries to assassinate anybody without any legal consequences. That is to say, the idea was to eliminate complete dictatorialism. The point I want to make regarding the opposition, this particular type of opposition, is they are not totally lackeys of the United States. It's worse than that. The United States owns them, it finances them, tells them what to do. They wouldn't do anything without the United States agreeing to them literally every single day. They're totally controlled by the United States. So the mistakes that they made come from the United States. You can imagine what it would mean to actually them coming back to office. They will dismantle absolutely everything. They will be engaging in retribution and vindictiveness of every imaginable kind, and will set Venezuela back more than 50 years of development, if not worse. And it will be very difficult to actually recover from that, because the United States will militarize their support, let's call it that way, of any possible government. So we need to redouble as much as possible our efforts in solidarity with Venezuela, because what is at stake for Venezuela is enormous. Where Venezuela to go, and where these to be the consequences, you can imagine the consequences for the rest of our continent. So it's extremely important. I think we're a bit relaxed because Maduro is doing very well in the polls, but nevertheless, never be so sure, because the opposition now, and they're already preparing the ground to declare that the election was rigged and it was fraud, and there's been information that some paramilitaries from Colombia have been contacted by the extreme right wing of Venezuela to bring in 1,000 paramilitaries to cause havoc on the day of the election, to cause chaos, so that, they can demonstrate that the masses are against this. So it's very, very dangerous. And none of them will be done without somebody in the State Department somehow agreeing to it. So viva Venezuela, let's redouble our support, and thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.